So a very warm welcome from a fairly warm Cairo. It's great that you can be with us this afternoon. We've got a very interesting session planned for you. As always, I'm joined by my dear colleagues Nora from Bahrain and Tema also from Cairo, along with myself. My name's John. I look after our teacher development work for the British Council in the Middle East and North Africa region. And of course, we're joined by Hala, who will be running today's session. Couple of reminders. We have a new website which provides lots of interesting details about the Teacher Networking Initiative, as well as recordings of previous web sessions that we've organized over the course of the last year and details of other forthcoming events. And we're going to share a link with you in the question and answer box, inshallah. So if you get an opportunity, and we thoroughly hope that you do get the opportunity to have a look at our website, please do so. Lots of interesting information on there. Okay, so today's session, integrating remote and face-to-face teaching. We thought it was particularly relevant to run this session now, as many teachers in many countries are returning to school after the long holidays, and also in some countries, but not all countries, the possibility of a return to face-to-face teaching is becoming a reality. So it's a good time to be talking about making good choices about whether we're going to do things as teachers in the face-to-face environment, whether we're going to use the online environment, and how we're going to bring those two things together to get the best results for our learners, of course, which is our ultimate goal. And as well as it being particularly relevant right now, we're also going to be making the point in this session that we want to hang on to the things, the understanding and the skills, knowledge, etc., that we've acquired and developed over the last year as a result of more online teaching, which is the result, of course, of pandemic and school closures. So it's those two things really about how to make good choices about using both face-to-face and the remote environments for teaching, and also to hang on to the gains that we've made over the last year or so. Hala, are you with us? Are you ready?
Yes. Hi, John. Hi, everybody.
Okay, over to you.
Thank you very much, John, for the interesting introduction, and welcome everybody to the Ask Hala webinar number 4 in this series. And let's start right away. So in today's webinar, we're going to look at actually 4 key learning outcomes. We're going to examine together what returning to school would look like if your plan is to teach face-to-face in the classroom very soon, and why integrating the remote and the face-to-face teaching might be a good idea, a useful thing to do, and when you're integrating the two models, what key considerations and what our top tips for you to integrate both the face-to-face and remote teaching. And we'll end up with a practical example from English language teaching content to show you how we can integrate both models and to get the benefits of both sides. I hope you're hearing and seeing my slides okay. Please let us know through the Q&A box if you're encountering any problem. So first of all, what would returning to school look like? So imagine now you're going back to school next month or maybe the month after, and tell us through the Q&A box what this would look like in your opinion. While you're doing this, I'd like to ask John and perhaps Noura as well to tell me about your thoughts. What would returning to school look like now, John and Noura, if you've been teaching remotely for a while, more than a year into the pandemic? Can you tell me what you think?
It's a really good question, Hala. I've got some scenarios in my head, I think, really, of different kinds of configurations, I suppose, where either some of the class, but not all of the class, are back in that face-to-face space. I think that's one possibility, that there are reduced numbers for reasons of social distancing, for example. I can think of another scenario where, you know, the whole class is back together face to face, but not every day, and that you know, that return is being staggered in some way. So I can think of different sorts of configurations there. Noura, what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Hala and John. I think teachers now gained lots of experience from last year. Last year was very confusing to everybody. I'm sure now they will have a plan A and a plan B. They will have a plan A for face-to-face and plan B for online or classes, and they will have plan C for updated plans of face-to-face and online. I think most teachers are thinking now of such plans. They gained lots of experiences from last year's
Noura,
outbreak and closure of schools and teaching.
You're suggesting, Noura, that the teacher is coming back to the school with different experiences, and the teacher actually is going back to school with different set of skills that they have developed during the past year. John, do you think this is true, and do you think that the learners as well are coming back with different skills and different experiences?
I do, and I think it's going to depend the extent of those skills, you know, in terms of, for example, digital literacy skills, what the possibilities have been over the last year for continued learning. And I think, you know, in some context, many learners will have become, you know, quite expert at learning online, either with the teacher in live sessions or before or after classes asynchronously. I think, you know, many learners will have developed better learning skills, that's for sure. But I also think, though, that you know, for many learners who haven't engaged for whatever reason, whether it's you know, connectivity issues or motivational issues, then, you know, clearly there's going to be some catching up to be done that we talked about, you know, in a couple of sessions ago, for example. So I think it's probably going to be quite a mixed picture in terms of those new skills for learners. And I think that's, you know, one thing I suppose we'll be looking at today is how is it then that teachers deal with that, you know, the different speeds, the different development, the different kinds of learning that learners have had. Yeah,
so it's we're still waiting for some responses from the audience, but yeah, so our imagination now is that the school will have a different setting, so reduced number of learners, a couple of days of face-to-face in school combined with remote teaching outside the school. Teachers and learners are coming back to school with different experience, different skills now. And I think there is a couple of comments in the chat box. Somebody, Sameh from Egypt, is talking about new methods and new techniques will be brought into the school when it reopens. I think Sameh as well talks about mix of face-to-face and online learning. And Nada, it will be much better than the previous year. Now we have the experience of both face-to-face and the remote teaching, and above all, now many of the teachers and the learners got the vaccine. That's interesting, and I'm not sure if John and Noura has got anything to say about this. Nada is really hopeful and thinks this year is going to be much better than the past year.
Of course, as soon as I mentioned
I agree with Nada. This is what.
Sorry, Noura, go ahead.
No, that's it, John. I agree with Nada. This is what I think. Yeah, teachers gained lots of experience.
Yeah, I think so. I was just going to say, as soon as I mention the word connectivity, of course, I lose connection, and I've just come back. But yeah, I think I also agree with Nada that I think we have, you know, many reasons to be very positive, and I think as practitioners that you know, one of our you know, priorities, I think, is to continue learning, and I think we've seen so much continued learning in very difficult circumstances over the last year, and I think that's the basis for the kind of you know, positivity that Nada is talking about. Yeah.
Nice. We still have some comments about hybrid blended teaching and an interesting experience for the learners as well. That's interesting. All right, so let's continue and take this discussion a little bit further into a different dimension, not very different, but still related. And think about the profiles and how these profiles have changed as a result of the pandemic. And to drive your thinking, to stimulate your thinking, I want you to think about two things. Moving from the teaching culture to the learning culture. So think about 2019, we're all in the class teaching the students face-to-face, doing all the normal stuff that I hope you still remember. Now think about a year and a half almost of gaining skills and experimenting with lots of things and developing experience and lots of stories to tell. Then going back to school with a plan A and plan B, as Noura suggested at the beginning, and a mix of models of delivery and teaching and all of these things. So things about moving from the culture of teaching to the culture of learning, and also think about this quotes by the Brazilian pedagogist Paulo Ferreira. In his famous book, Pedagogy of Freedom, whoever teaches learns in the act of teaching, and whoever learns teaches in the act of learning. Think about these two things, and let's discuss together how the profiles of the teacher, the learner, the learning technology, and the parent have it changed as a result of the pandemic. So I'll start myself. The teacher profile has it changed. So we're moving now from a teacher who depended on the course book and who depended on 100% on the face-to-face interaction to give instructions to the students, to a teacher who's ready to juggle really different methods, different modes of teaching, virtual, remote, online, face-to-face, high-tech tools, low-tech tools. So the teacher profile and the teacher skills and teacher personality and persona really has it changed. What about you guys? What do you think? Was it a journey of learning on both sides for the teacher and the learner? Has there been a shift really from the teaching of culture, the culture of teaching, to the culture of learning? What do you think? Tell us what you think in the Q&A box. And till you do this, I'll continue discussing this with my two colleagues, John and Noura. John and Noura, what do you think? Have your own profiles changed yourselves?
Yeah, I think so. I think I've become, I think, a lot more conscious of how to communicate. I mean, I was conscious, clearly, as all human beings are, especially about you know, different ways of communicating. But I think the necessity to do the vast majority of communication, whether it's talking to colleagues or teaching remotely, has made me very, very conscious of how best, I think, what kinds of choices to make when it comes to getting across clear messages. Things like, you know, having sessions which are shorter because people's attention time in the remote environment tend to be shorter. Being more sensitive about turn taking, for example, really making the most of some of the features of online communication platforms, like raising your hand, that kind of thing. So I think I've become more sensitive, I think, to other people's communication needs in different contexts as a result of not always being able to contact them face to face. Nora, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with you, John. Me too. I've learned a lot, and from our webinars as well, I've learned a lot from Hala, from teachers. It wouldn't be possible to engage this big number of teachers in our events if it is face. And I would only engage teachers from Bahrain, but now we are engaging teachers from all MENA, from every country, and teachers even from other areas, but working in MENA. So that's another positive thing. And we are learning a lot from everybody and sharing experiences and best practices. And I've learned a lot about platforms that teachers can use in their online teaching.
Right. John, I think we're receiving loads of interesting comments in the Q&A box. Would you like to tell me about them a little bit?
Yeah, I think an interesting comment from Meziad, who talks about becoming more patient. And I think, yeah, that resonates with me completely. And also, I think, you know, this thing about turn taking that I was talking about, she talks about integrating all students into education, you know, and in that broad sense, I presume, not just in the classroom, but making it possible. And that's a benefit, or can be a benefit of online learning, as Nora was saying, that it is possible to use that as a way of including more people in what you're doing, you know, that we have the ability to reach out in a way that we didn't really have to the same extent before. So good comment about patience and integration of all students. Right. Lots of comments coming in about, you know, adapting to different situations and making, you know, being able to respond quickly. And that's a comment from Faisal. I think that's very true indeed. I'm just looking through now. Yeah, Marisette, for example, talking about being equipped with the latest technology. Lots of comments coming in. Nora was saying about learn a lot more about tools. And I think one word, I think, that's been kind of a watchword for us that Marisette uses is interactive techniques. You know, how do you get the online environment to be engaging and interesting and fun for learners? Yeah, so some really good points there about patience, interaction, integration, and knowledge about different platforms.
Right, and Bilal as well from Yemen, I think is touching on how the students' profile also has changed, because we keep talking about how the teacher's profile has changed. Bilal thinks that the students themselves need to practice using online learning devices, and it's the teacher's role to familiarize the learners with tips of using such tools. So here we go. So it's not only the teacher who has developed new skills, but the learner also has developed the new skills with the support of the teacher. And obviously the learning technology is playing a different role now. The learning technologies before the pandemic was an option, and there was a lot of effort and training on how to integrate learning technologies into teaching. Learning technologies now is, I'm not sure if it's an option or beyond that really. I mean, how can we continue and resume learning if schools are closed, for example, or how can we continue learning if schools are open for 2 days only a week, you know? So learning technologies are playing a different role now, completely different and significant role. But nobody is talking about how the parents' role and the parents' profile from being almost passive element in the learning process to a very important key element of the learning process. John, you wanted to say something?
Yes, except our good friend Yusuf, who is talking about parents and uses the word involvement and says that parents are more involved in their kids' education as a result of them being at home and online teaching. And I think if we look back, to a point 18 months ago, then it's always been our ambition, I think, as practitioners or as educational managers or whatever, to get better involvement from parents, to make parents care more about the content of their kids' learning, about the success, etc. So I think, that's another very positive point that Yusuf brings out, in line with what you're saying about talking about parents and their involvement.
Right. It seems it's very clear now to me that it has really been a learning journey, and we are shifting from the teaching culture to the learning culture on so many different levels, on the teacher level, the learner and the parent, and perhaps the school and administration as well. Right.
And Hala, one of the participants, Rachel, mentioned that her students now are proud of their teachers because they are using the technology efficiently and using many applications, which is good.
Very nice, very nice. That reminds me of a colleague that I had a chat with this morning. This colleague in March 2020 didn't know how to use Zoom, like didn't know really what Zoom is and how to start a session or something. Now this colleague is sharing with me an interesting list of 7 useful online tools that she's going to use with her learners. So it was really interesting how much she learned in the past year. Thanks Noura, for your comment. Now we're going to listen to a different voice from mine, and they have your say a part of the session. We're going to listen to Asil, who really brainstormed and had a good discussion with some of the teachers from the community about the key challenges in face-to-face teaching. So let's see what Asil has got.
Hello, it could just be me, but Hala, we can't hear from Asil. Connectivity problem, perhaps?
Even Hala, you are on mute, it seems.
You couldn't hear Asil's voice, guys, right?
That's
No.
correct.
Okay, let me play that again.
We can't hear Hala.
Okay, I'll stop sharing and share again. Hopefully it works this time.
Hello everyone. In Have Your Say, I will share with you what teachers from Yemen,
Can you
Lebanon,
hear
and
now?
Oman have said about the key challenges in
Yeah.
face-to-face teaching. Firstly, changes in classroom environment. Due to COVID, we know that students are forced to wear masks all the time and maintain social distancing. Therefore, it might not have positive impact on them. Low motivation. We know that motivation has been one of the key problems in online classrooms, and students were barely attending their classes because of that. Therefore, they might not be excited about going to school and attending their classes. High expectations from students. Students might expect a lot from teachers. They might expect teachers to support them all the time and guide them, as they were doing during online classrooms. They might expect teachers to be lenient with them as well. Content needs to be prepared thoroughly, as course materials might overlap the online course materials. Understanding students' attitude towards real classroom experience. Students have been away from their classrooms and schools for almost a year. Therefore, their behavior might change and they might not have a positive behavior of attending their classrooms. Lack of awareness of certain skills. We know that because of online classes, some skills were not mastered, such as writing, speaking, pronunciation. Therefore, students might be weak in these skills. Shortage in electricity, unstable economy, and social situations might affect them from attending their classrooms and going to schools. Curriculum is not flexible and has constraints. Teachers are overloaded with tasks and administrative work. And finally, classrooms are not equipped with the necessary tools for group work. And these are what teachers from Yemen, Lebanon, and Oman shared about the key challenges in face-to-face teaching. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Asil. So now you've listened to Asil, and you can see on the screen a list of the key challenges in face-to-face teaching after going back to school. So what's the top challenge from your list, from this list for you? Is it changes in the classroom environment, low motivation, high expectations? What's it exactly? Can you identify one top challenge from this list? While you're making up your mind, John, what do you think of this list of challenges we got from our teachers in Yemen, Lebanon, and Oman?
Well, in line with our reoccurring theme that everything has changed, nothing has changed, I would have to go with number 2, low motivation, because I think that in some cases, in some contexts, for some students, they've got out of the habit of relating to one another in the face-to-face environment and in a classroom environment, and I think that for some people it will be difficult, for some learners it will be difficult to go back to that context in the same way. And I think for some the manifestation of that sort of loss of familiarity, I think, will be lower motivation. I think learners have become used to, I think, really being in an online environment or being in no learning environment, and I think it will be difficult for them, as it always is after a long break, to come back to that face-to-face environment where they have to sit still, listen to the teacher, talk to their friends, that kind of thing. So I think that will impact on motivation. So that would be my number one challenge.
Right. What about you, Noura? What's your top challenge from this list?
I think the content that need to be prepared thoroughly, this will be very challenging, because last year most teachers were experimenting, schools were experimenting, Ministry of Educations. In some countries they do have digital content, but not all countries. I think this year everyone will think about having digital face-to-face content, and this will be very challenging to prepare the materials.
Yeah, I'd go with Noura and agree that my top challenge in this list is preparing content, and I'm thinking from a teacher perspective, really making decisions and making the right choices and deciding on which content and prioritizing learning outcomes and foundational skills and deciding which can be delivered how. This can be a challenge for the teachers, and some other challenges really from the chat boxes around the weak or poor social skills from the kids' side. This is something really interesting to think about. How the children, when they come back to school, how they interact socially with each other and with their teacher, and managing difficult behavior and all of that. Low motivation is somebody else, and lack of awareness of certain skills, classroom environment, and lots of other things. All right, so let's move on. And I have another question for you, but before I give the floor for your answers, I'd like just to shed some light on the key differences between face-to-face and remote teaching. And I believe in order to get a good understanding of how to integrate both models, the remote and the face-to-face teaching, one needs first to understand the key differences and have a clear distinction in their head between the two different modes. So in terms of planning, for example, think about the time you spend in planning for your face-to-face lessons and for your remote lessons. In my experience, it took me more time to plan for my remote teaching or remote training or anything I intended to deliver remotely. And in terms of the factors I need to bear in my mind while planning in remote delivery, teaching or training, I thought about many other factors, even more factors than the normal factors I would think about while planning for face-to-face activities. I would think about the suitable platform. I would think about the electricity and the power cuts, and what day is it in the week, and if this day there is a possibility that the electricity might go out or something, or internet is down in the country or something. I would think about my audience internet strength and connectivity. I would think about how much I would speak to the screen, and if this is going to make the audience feel bored, and how I would segment my talk time across the session. So I thought about more factors and different factors that I would have thought about while planning for face-to-face activities. I don't know what about you guys? Tell me in the Q&A box. And in terms of the content, you know, when you teach face-to-face, the content is either students read from the textbook, or they get some content from your board work, or you might like to play some recordings in the lesson in the classroom, or you might want to show them a video. But let's be realistic. Playing audios and videos in a normal face-to-face class wouldn't happen every day, right? I mean, I used to be a school teacher, and these things wouldn't happen as, you know, business as usual or something. They would happen every now and then. But when I planned for my remote teaching, I had to think really about multi-dimensional approaches to communicate my content to the learners. I had to think about which parts of the content should be written on a screen, which parts should be sent as audio files through WhatsApp, which parts should be sent as pre-recorded videos through Facebook groups, and so on. Also, I had to think about the size and the amount of learning per unit. So in a face-to-face class, I could teach present perfect in the positive form, in the negative form, and I can end the lesson with giving them an idea about the question form, present perfect. But in the online environment or in the remote environment, I would think carefully about if they will really understand and will digest all of this amount of learning in one day, in one message. Okay, so the amount and the size of learning units really mattered. Again, tell me what you think in the chat box. The communication. What kind of communication did we used to have when we teach face-to-face? Like dialogues between the teacher and the student, perhaps dialogues between a few students amongst each other, but communication is becoming different when you plan for your remote lesson, right? Tell me more about that in the Q&A box, and tell me about the role of the social media that you have now these days while planning for your remote teaching. The interaction. So in the face-to-face class, that's real-time interaction, right? But in the remote teaching, it's different. It's different and similar. It could be similar and different, really. And what about the feedback? In the face-to-face class, when your students, when did they get feedback from you? And which was better? Feedback given in the face-to-face class instantly, or feedback given, like delayed feedback given asynchronously, remotely? And the interaction really is driven by who? Is it teacher driven in the face-to-face class? Does it have to be now student driven in the remote classes? Because we talked about motivation and the level of motivation, and you cannot really motivate everybody through a screen, right? So think about the interaction and who's really driving the interaction forward in both situations. Think about the facilitation. Were you facilitating learning in the face-to-face classroom, or were you the content expert and the person who owns the knowledge? You were lecturing your students in the face-to-face class, and how is that not almost possible anymore in the remote teaching? And you cannot always be the person who gives the information throughout a screen and a camera, right? So have you become more of facilitator in the remote teaching? Again, think about the interaction patterns. The teacher-learner, the learner-learner, and the learner content. In the face-to-face class, for example, the learner used to interact with the content through you, right? Is this still the case in the remote teaching? Does the learner interact with the content through you always, all the time? So think about all of these things. The engagement. in which situation learners are more engaged, given their attention span, given their distractions. So I'm sitting at home learning through the computer. I might look at my mobile phone. I might, hear something coming from the window. Think about the commitment. In which situation students were more committed, and think about the personal learning time. In which situation do I spend more time as a as a learner personally? In which situation? Is it in the face-to-face class or at home? Think about the assessment. Was it marks focused and score focused, pass and fail kind of thing in the face-to-face class, and at the end of the term or at the end of the year there is this big exam at the end? Or this had to change in the remote teaching, and it had to focus more on feedback and support and continuous assessment and evaluation. Think about the class discipline and managing the students' behaviors. Are the rules you set in both situations different? Do you need to add some extra rules when you manage a remote class? What about the expectations? Are your expectations different in both situations? Are the learners and the parents' expectations different? And think about the roles. We've been talking about the roles and how the roles have changed and other aspects. Let me check the chat box. John, do you want to tell me about how are we doing with the Q&A box? Did we get any interesting responses?
Sure, yes, we did, and really across the range of the things that you've been talking about. A few comments coming in and agreeing that the planning is more time-consuming for that remote environment, and that in terms of content and the management of the lesson, the management of the engagement of students with that content, people talking about shortening the amount of exposure time, but making it more interesting. A couple of comments that's tremendously important because of attention span and for reasons of increased interactivity. Some general comments coming in. Interesting one. Blended is better. That was went along with another comment that said face-to-face is better. Things to do with body language as well. A number of comments around that that relate, I think, to your points about engagement and perhaps also assessment and feedback. That body language that you can pick up on in the face-to-face environment, so important really in terms of good communication, in terms of understanding how well students themselves are understanding and learning. And so a practical point, I think, which is a good one, about controlling attendance, which I suppose is linked to your discipline and behavior management. That in the online context, it's more difficult to control basic attendance as well as basic engagement. And some of our colleagues from the Yemen are kind of talking about this as an habitual problem because of context where class size is up to 80 students per teacher. So enormous food for thought across the range of things that you've talked about there.
Yeah, and I'm really impressed with the comments that I'm getting through the Q&A box. I mean, Mohammed al-Najjar, our dear colleague from Jordan, is talking about humanizing our online communication by showing care and respect. And somebody anonymous is sad that students just do the assessment as a kind of compliance. That's a good point to think about. Praise at all stages of the lesson and evaluate what the students is doing. I think that's a key difference in favor of remote teaching. Face-to-face commitment is the best, of course. there is a long discussion around that. So the point I'm trying to make here, and particularly on this slide, is the more we understand the differences between face-to-face and remote teaching in terms of planning, content, communication, interaction, engagement, assessment, discipline, and behavior management, and the other aspects, the more we become able to integrate both of them. We understand the differences, but we also understand the benefits and how to bring both models together coherently and smoothly, with one ultimate goal is to facilitate learning for the learners. Let's move on to the next slide. Actually, this is a matching activity, and imagine now you're a teacher, and now you've done your thinking about the benefits of both models, and I'd like you now to group the benefits, this list of benefits, under which model. So which of these benefits go under face-to-face, and which of these benefits go under remote teaching, and which can go really under both. There's a big debate around that. So you've got flexibility, motivation, being in control, commitment, comfort and own space, personalization, easier for collaboration or easy collaboration, presence, pace, and instant feedback. So take a minute and think about how would you group the benefits under which model, face-to-face or remote teaching? While you're doing this, I'd like to get back to John around some of the comments. I mean, the responses in the Q&A box are really like massive. John, do you want to pick any interesting comments from there and talk a bit about it?
Yeah, I do actually. Our new friend Mary said, you know, it is relevant, I think, to the question that you've asked about which kind of models, which of the two models do these different ingredients, factors fit into. And she talks about, well, I'll read it to you. Yeah, going back to face-to-face teaching will not be as the same as before, as there will be more limitations in group work and other activities. It might be that even in face-to-face teaching, it seems like we are teaching remotely too. What I've understood from that, and I think it's a really interesting question, isn't it? It's about body language, it's about social skills, it's about turn taking, it's about ways of communicating. That to some extent, are we saying that over the last year or so, that these skills have been declining for our learners, and therefore that as well as teaching them English and the present perfect, that one of the things that we might need to do right at the beginning is look at activities that really help learners, you know, get back into the swing of things, as it were, in terms of the face-to-face interaction, and that we shouldn't take it for granted, I suppose, that you know, that learners will just pick up from where they left off. So I thought that's a very interesting general point that cuts across, I think, all of these things that we need to consider in making choices about which channel to use and how to integrate both channels. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point indeed, and there is a lot of thinking around it, and you know, the amount of responses we're getting is really enormous, and I am really impressed. But we can agree all that teaching is not going to be the same as before the pandemic. Even if we go back to face-to-face teaching, it's not going to be the regular face-to-face teaching. It's not going to be the 2019 face-to-face teaching. It's going to be face-to-face teaching with the hat of a teacher who has been trained under difficult conditions, and a teacher who has gained unique set of skills in a kind of limited time, and it wasn't an option really. It wasn't like an optional training course. Teachers had to gain those skills and had to experiment with them, and had to test themselves on a daily basis, and had to test their skills in each and every lesson. So going back literally to what we used to be on before the pandemic, I don't think this is happening anymore. Naturally, it's not happening. I think we're going back to the new face-to-face teaching. We're going back to the new school teaching, school systems. We're going back to the new blended or hybrid model, or whatever you want to call it. We started also to get responses on the matching activities, and here is the correct answers, in my opinion anyways. You can argue that some can fall under both categories really. So in remote teaching, we enjoy the flexibility. So you give them the task and they can respond now, in the evening, tomorrow morning. They can send you a WhatsApp message. They can send you a message on a Facebook group. They can take a picture of their handwriting and send it to you. So there is flexibility. It's comfort. The student can engage in a lesson from their bedroom, from their living room, while having some cereals and cold milk, while eating their sandwiches. So it's comfort. You have your own space. Pace. So I have a test. I have an assignment sent by my teacher now. I can think about it for 30 minutes, and I actually can think about it for a couple of hours. I can leave it and do some research on the internet and get back to it and do it properly. So I deal with the content, the knowledge, the assignment at my own pace, with my own speed. I'm driving my learning. I'm in control of my learning steering wheel, if you like. Personalization, again, I don't have strong internet connection at home, so my teacher sends me WhatsApp messages, or my teacher calls me on the phone because I have no internet at all, or the power has gone off or something. Being in control, so I'm controlling the pace of my learning, the level of challenge and difficulty, the time when I learn and respond to the assignments. In the face-to-face, we enjoy the physical presence, and John can really advocate for this very strongly. When we meet together in the office face-to-face, it feels totally different from 1,000 online meetings. So we enjoy the physical face-to-face, we enjoy the facial expressions, the real voice tone, the looks, and all of that. Instant feedback. So when I answer the question wrong, from the teacher's facial interaction, I know if I did right or wrong, or the teacher can use their body gestures to give hints on my answers. Or actually, after we finish, all of us, after we finish the activity, the teacher can just give everybody the answers on the board, you know. Motivation is expected to be high in the face-to-face, although Asil has made a very good point really from our teachers community in Yemen, Iraq, and Oman, that perhaps these days students might have low motivation towards going back to school, and simply they fear the virus. They don't want to be exposed to contracting the virus or something. Or perhaps staying for so long at home made them attached to home more than the school. The transition is going to take time, I think. Commitment, again, there is a theory that people commit to face-to-face study rather than online. Think about the MOOCs. I personally cannot complete a MOOC. I cannot commit myself to a MOOC. I never completed a MOOC. And that said, face-to-face is easier for collaboration. When we bring students together in one space, they can draw a poster together, they can do role plays together, they can shout answers, they can go back to the board and play together. You know, it's easier. I'm not saying there is no collaboration online, there is, and we've been telling you about a range of tools where you and the students can collaborate with each other, but it's easier in the physical face-to-face environment. We're moving now to some considerations really, and our top tips for you guys when you integrate face-to-face with remote teaching when schools reopen in some parts of the region. My top tip really is to revisit the learning outcomes. Open the curriculum again, think about the learning outcomes for each unit, prioritize the learning outcomes, and identify, make yourself aware of the foundation skills. Then before you introduce the new content, do some effort and put some time in reviewing all the content. Then decide on the essential skills. Why? Because it's easy now to guess that the time that will be spent at school will be limited or shortened, given, of course, the health measures. So if you used to teach for 45 minutes in the past per lesson, you're probably expected to teach 30 minutes or something when the schools reopen. So make the best use of the shortened in-person time when the schools reopen. This doesn't mean, integration between face-to-face and remote teaching doesn't mean you have to invent two completely different curricula. No, don't do that. Think about the learning outcomes and the goals and what you really want your students to learn by the end of each unit and take it from there. So adapt the way you teach the content rather than the content itself. So don't invent new content. Same content, but different ways, different channels, different models of communicating this content to the students. There is a recommendation that when you start with a remote first approach, integration becomes more smoothly and more doable. So, and we have this privilege already. We started with remote teaching first. We've been teaching remotely for a while. So when we come back to school and we try to integrate, adding actually the face-to-face ingredient to the recipe should be easier than adding the remote teaching to the face-to-face ingredient, if you know what I mean. And again, this links to a previous point. Use the same materials, use the same curriculum, but in two different settings, and stick to the curriculum progression. Stick to the curriculum, don't change that, but think about different ways of communicating it. Again, because the time frames will be shortened, that's something easy to understand. It's good for you if you can break the content into smaller manageable units. What you used to teach in 45 minutes before the pandemic cannot be taught in the same time frame, right? So think about teaching less content in shorter time frames. Utilize the in-person time to the maximum. So when the students come to the class in person, make a very good use and a clever use of this time, and assign this time for activities that need your support and explanation, or activities that can be translated into collaboration between the students and discussions and working on solving problems. And also take time and think about which skills in the curriculum should be taught asynchronously or synchronously, and what can be translated to virtual learning, remote learning, and what really cannot be translated into remote learning and has to happen in the face-to-face class. Finally, don't forget to set your learning expectations. You said what remains the same is that you set expectations, but you set them differently in both situations. Create routines. Again, routines might be different in both situations, but more importantly, do not expect to follow the same pacing. Perhaps your learners would learn faster in the face-to-face classroom and more slowly in remote lessons, or vice versa. We don't know. So don't expect that both learning happen at the same speed. Before I finish with the practical example, do we have anything to take from the Q&A box, John?
I think it would be good to look now at the practical example. I think there've been lots of comments throughout the session so far.
Yeah, right. Right, so I chose this practical example from an English course book. It's about teaching present simple to talk about everyday routines. So now imagine it's September or it's October and we're back to school, and the schools will be open for 2 days only a week. So you're required to teach your students face to face for 2 days and manage the rest of the learning remotely during the rest of the week. So this is my suggested plan. On Sunday, I'll send students a picture of someone who brushes their teeth. It could be me, by the way. I'll take a picture of myself brushing my teeth, or a picture from the course book, or a picture from magazine or something. And I'll leave them some questions on WhatsApp. For example, I'll ask them if they think this person who brushes their teeth do this every day? Should they? And what about themselves? What about the students? And I'll leave them responding on the WhatsApp with their answers. Okay, so this will be my kind of introducing the topic to them. That Sunday, that's remote teaching. They didn't come to school yet. On Monday, they'll come to school and I have a 30-minute plan where I'm going to explain what present simple means. I'll take the examples they've given on WhatsApp and my picture, and I'll try to elicit more examples, and I'll try to explain or elicit from them the meaning of the present simple and how we form it, and the suffixes of the S and ES and all of that. And we're going to practice some pronunciation. I'm going to say something and ask them to repeat and do some drilling. On Tuesday, they're not coming to school, so I'm going to send them a follow-up task and ask them to fill in gaps. I'm going to send them the task on Google Classroom, maybe, or Kahoot, or quizzes or Quizlets, any online tool that you and they feel comfortable with and familiar with. I'll ask them to fill in gaps or choose the right words, and maybe to challenge them a little bit more, take some words from the exercise and make up a story about their own daily routines. On Wednesday, they will come back to school and I'll be ready for them with a small project where they're going to collaborate together in drawing a poster, for example, and on the poster they need to give advice using the present simple to their friends on how to stay hygienic every day to protect themselves from the coronavirus. So I'm expecting them to use the present simple in a productive writing task, like you wash your hands every day, you brush your teeth every day, you drink water a lot, and things like that. So that was my practical example. And by this, we come to the end of today's webinar. I hope we've covered the learning outcomes we promised to cover at the beginning. And here are some useful resources for you guys if you want to read more about the topic. There is a nice article by Microsoft about using technology and moving from the teaching culture to the learning culture. There is also a blog by Ed Week on how to make your lessons cohesive and coherent in both remote and in-person classes. And there is also a useful article on Edutopia on the 5 tips of the efficient transition between virtual and personal teaching. That's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hala. And if we could just take up a couple more minutes of your time, I just wanted to read something to you that, again, from our new friend Marisette, who makes the following comment and question. Is it possible to have a webinar on exactly how to set up hybrid teaching? It's a really good question, and I think it's something that maybe we could look at, and that we take your example and actually go through it perhaps with the exact choices about the kinds of platforms that you spoke about. This webinar, as all of our webinars, although they have a practical focus, they're essentially intended to be generic in that we're trying to encourage consideration and making right choices and reflecting on some of those considerations and choices. But I think there's a very strong argument for doing something specific that leads on from what you've just spoken about, and to some extent will be contained in some of the useful resources that you're pointing to at the end. So I think it is a complex area. We're new, I think, to the idea of hybridity, of if you like, teasing out the benefits of different channels and how to bring them together and make the best use of them. We've had a really, really interesting afternoon. Thank you so much, Hala. Thank you so much, Nora. Thank you so much, Tema. We've covered a lot, and it's been extremely thought-provoking. And I think the quality of the comments that have come in to engage with the content that we've looked at, Hala, has been extraordinary.
Right.
So thank you so much indeed, audience and teachers from around this region, for taking the time to be with us today and for putting so much effort into the discussion, the thinking, the practical planning of what is, to some extent, a new world for us that will be starting very soon as schools begin to reopen. So thank you very much indeed. Temas reminded us that about the website, so if you haven't already registered for the next month's Ask Hala webinar, which will be the last Thursday as always of each month at 4 p.m. Egypt time, please do so. And between times, keep your feedback coming in, keep looking at the website, keep thinking about those choices and about what changes have occurred since the pandemic began and how we're adapting to those changes as things themselves adapt, and primarily around the opportunities of renewed face-to-face teaching. Thank you very much indeed. Have a very good afternoon and a very good evening, and we'll see you in a month's time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.